His special assignment, The Changing Face of Comics. Our critic at large, Greg Moody, examines the history of comic books and the problems that very nearly killed the entire industry.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Superman.
In my imagination, he's still flying around up there, making the world safe for truth, justice, in the American way. And I still read him, along with Batman and Justice League and just about anything else that catches my eye. Because that's what comic books do, and have done since the 1930s. They catch the eye with garish color and heroic characters, hard knocks fantasy, and exuberant escapism. They never were just for kids.
Comic books began as reprinted collections of newspaper comic strips in the 1920s, given away as come-ons at movie theaters and department stores. Freebies. Here, kid, keep your yap shut. By the mid-1930s, they were dealing with original material, pulp westerns and tough detective stories, funny stuff and wild adventure yarns. Until 1938, when two guys from Cleveland, Ohio, created a character who would change the face of comics forever. Superman's popularity unleashed a barrage of costume superpowered imitators, and from that moment, fortunes only seemed to rise. Suddenly, there were hundreds of titles from crime to superheroes, terror to kid stuff. Nearly 1 billion comics were published in 1949 alone. It was a golden age for sexy art and hard-edged storytelling. And then, the bottom fell out. Parents and doctors protested the sex and violence. A new toy called TV ate away at the fantasy market. And by the mid-1970s, a once thriving industry appeared on the brink of extinction.
What saved comic books?
The Changing Face of Comics, our critic at large, Greg Moody, examines the forces that nearly destroyed the comic book industry and the forces that revived it.
It was the 1950s, a time when everybody liked Ike and a lot of people hated comic books. Comics were in their golden age, wild storytelling, exaggerated, sexy graphics that played off the need for escapism from the Cold War and the bomb. One Dr. Frederick Wortham, however, claimed that they led children down the path of violence and psychosis. Parents, ministers, and teachers were in an uproar. The floodgates of protest opened, and the music stopped.
It almost capsized the industry. They started... a lot of companies went completely out of business, and the most creative company, EC, was down to their final title, which is Mad Magazine. And everything else that was coming out was just purely homogenized. It pretty much killed the industry for 20 years.
What saved the Cape Crusaders, what saved the comic book industry as a whole were these. Specialty shops, stores devoted to the art, adventure, and collectability of comic books. 5 years ago, there were only 100 such stores. Today, there are more than 4,000 nationwide.
With the advent of shops like mine, the big companies, Marvel and DC in particular, saw that it was possible to put out a product that older people would be interested in a more adult way.
Another factor was the growth of the independents, small publishers who grew out of the underground comics industry of the 1960s to challenge the major companies with titles such as ElfQuest and American Flag. Unusual titles with harder stories and art that proved to DC and Marvel that comic books weren't just for kids anymore.
They forced the two big comic companies, Marvel and DC, to realize that there is an adult audience out there. Since most of the independents aren't available to kids, they're not available at 7-Elevens or stuff, only through specialty stores like this one.
It was, however, a long road back. Just over 100 titles were published by the three major companies in the mid-1970s. By 1985, there were 190 titles. This year, some 300 comic titles are expected to be turned out, with a combined circulation of 150 million issues, generating $300 million in revenue.
Today, the comic book industry is robust, and the superheroes of the late 30s are experiencing a rebirth. More about them, including the granddaddy of them all, tomorrow. On special assignment, I'm Critic at Large Greg Moody, 9 News.